this webinar, we'll be looking at data from our parent experience report, which we published in conjunction with our staff and our pupil experience annual reports in September. It's the data that we'll be talking about within this session is based on around 72,000 parents' responses, so parents and carers from England who've taken part in a parent experience survey that has been run through Adorio. And we'll be looking at how their perceptions changed over the last couple of years and the current experience that they are facing within schools and trusts at the moment. My colleague Iona mentioned earlier that unfortunately John Murphy hasn't been able to join us today because he's feeling under the weather. But you're in capable hands because we've got Dr. Kathy Weston with us today from Tooled Up, and Iona will be joining us on the panel. So I'll hand over to Kathy first, just to introduce herself and tell you a little bit about what she does.
Oh, hi everybody. Thank you so much for inviting me today. And may I say congratulations to Adurio for collating such a terrific data set. That is not easy to do, so well done. I am the founder of Tooled Up Education, and we specialise in evidence-based approaches for school communities. And we essentially support parental engagement, teacher CPD. So I was very interested in the last segment. And making sure that we are translating research into actionable ideas that schools are using effectively. So that's essentially what we do, and we support around 177 schools in 8 countries. So yeah, lots of I've really enjoyed the conversation so far, and interested in some of those parallels between what teachers need and want and how they're going to stay in their role, and how we can boost and support parents to feel engaged as well.
Yeah, I think we can have a really interesting discussion following on from the parent data with what you see from Tooled Up and what we see within our data. Iona was in the previous session, but you might want to just quickly reintroduce yourself to those that have joined us since the staff session.
Yes, especially since I forgot to introduce myself at the start of the previous session. So yeah, I'm Iona Jackson, and I'm managing director at Adurio. As we've said, John was going to be with us today. What I'm going to do in this session is very much sort of try and act as a mouthpiece of schools and trusts that we've worked with. So over the years, we've captured a lot of really good practice from schools and trusts that we work with, and I have sort of tried to collect up as much of that wisdom as I can, and we'll try and share that. So whilst I am here as a representative of Adurio for the next hour, I'm going to try very, very hard to actually be a representative of the trust sector at large. There is room in the chat for anybody to add your own experiences, how you've seen things that have worked or not worked, as well as we go through the conversation.
Yeah, I'm just going to double check that you guys can see the screen before I go ahead, because I realised I wasn't sharing for a second, but I think we are all good.
We can see
all good?
Yeah.
Lovely. But so what we'll start off by doing, very similar to the layout of the last session, is we'll have a look through some of the headlines from our parent annual experience report that we published in September, and we'll look at some of those headlines and some of the areas of improvement, some of those areas where we find challenges emerging, and then what we'll do is we'll kind of have a discussion again. It's very similar to the last sessions in terms of layout, where we talk through some of the reasons why we think we see what we see in the data, and kind of like some of those things, areas that we can see as improvement. Some of those headlines that we saw within our parent experience report this year was that actually there has been an improvement within engagement and comms, and whilst the engagement and the communications have improved, the trust relationship has remained unclear. Parents tend to be more positive about elements of their experience, though the gap, so the primary parents and the gap within secondary parents is narrowing, where in the past we have seen a significant difference. It is improving. When I say improving, getting closer, so that we see that experience being relatively similar in those. In their own words, parents are talking positively about the reporting, progress reporting and meetings with the school. That they are improving, but there are areas that they would like to see those develop further within that. And we'll have a look at some of those open answer responses from the survey data to delve into that in a bit more detail, to look at some of the things that they are appreciating about the progress reporting in the meetings with the school, and areas where they feel that they could see that improvement within them. Um, we first dive into kind of the engagement and the comms. What we did within the annual reports is we looked at the questions across the modules. So these are modules of the surveys that we run. So you can see there we've got trust, mutual trust and respect. There was an improvement in all questions. Within that module. And what this shows here is the change, the overall changes within the modules that we have, and we don't see completely negative changes across all modules, but we see some with mixed results, such as pupil needs and parents events, and some with limited change. So those ones have remained fairly consistent over time, and we see those at the top, such as the improving trust, mutual trust and respect, informing parents, and communication methods. Those are the areas where we see the most improvements within the parent data sets for those. The specific questions where we see those positive changes, you can see here is where parents are more satisfied with schools' efforts to engage them. We can see they feel more informed with regard to the child's punctuality. They're more satisfied with the school's efforts to engage them as a parent. They're seeing that their feedback to the school has impact, and 2% increase on that one from 2026 in 2023 to 28% of parents reporting that they see that their feedback to the school has impact in 24-25. We also see an improvement in how respected parents feel by the school. And we see now nearly 70% of parents reporting that they feel respected by the school within the staff data set. I mentioned this in the previous session when we are talking about the staff data sets, but again with a sample size of around 72,000 parents, these changes of around 3%, 2% are a significant change when we're talking about a data size that it is. When looking at the negatives, there were less significant changes. So these ones are the ones where we see negative changes and negative shifts, although they're minimal and smaller than the positive changes within the parent data set. These ones tend to lie around areas such as school events, the role of the trust in their school, the school's approach to marking assessments fitting their child's needs, or how easy or difficult it is to discuss the child's progress or other issues with the school if they're needed. So there's a variety of different reasons. There's no one clear trend within those that stands out. It shows that there's a very much nuanced change of where elements of challenge are appearing within the parent data set. What we did see within the parent data set is that primary parents, so parents of pupils in primary schools, tend to be more positive about their experience as opposed to secondary parents and parents of pupils in secondary schools. Now that may be due to size of the school experience or other factors, but the trend is consistent throughout when looking at this through the lens of primary and secondary for those. So we're going to start off here by having a look at how satisfied parents felt with the school's efforts to engage them. And what we've done within this section here, we've selected questions that we think represent the parent experience, most of the areas of parent experience within those within the report, and had a look at how those have changed over time. In the annual report, you can see these trends in there and look at some of the commentary that we've got within it. But what I'm going to do is kind of talk over where we see this trend reoccurring with them. So it may seem like I repeat myself in the fact that this trend is consistent across. So what I'll try and talk about here is the fact that we have seen a slight improvement there for primary and secondary. When we compare the data across those 3 years, we see that from 68% in 2022 to 2023. We've seen that increase for primary in how satisfied they are with the school's efforts to engage them, up to 72%, and then a slight dip down to 71% in 24-25. Whereas for secondary, we actually saw a dip in 23-24 with the school's efforts to engage them, with an increase in the percentage that were reporting that they were satisfied with the school's efforts to engage them. So what we've seen there is that trend of that actually that the gap is narrowing between the experience of primary and secondary, with primary experience worsening slightly over the last year, and the experience of secondary actually improving over the last year, with how satisfied they are with schools' efforts to engage them. Primary parents are more satisfied with comms, but again, we see that gap closing. So over the 3 years, we see that slight positive trend of the upward trend of it going from 63 to 65. But when we look at the data over the 3 years, we can see that there has been that slight decrease in experience for primary parents from 68% down to 65% over the last 2 academic years, with the school's efforts to communicate with them. So the satisfaction with communication has slightly deteriorated from a primary parent perspective, but it has improved year on year for secondary. So we see that secondary parents are more satisfied now than they were 3 years ago with how schools are communicating with them, and we have seen that increase 3 years now within the data. A majority of parents feel respected. So we can see that 79% of primary parents in last year's academic data felt respected by the school. Whereas when we look at that with secondary, we see that it's 66% in the last academic year, improving from 63 the year before. But we can see as a trend over time, they're relatively consistent with how respected their parents feel by their child's school. This is an interesting one because this one talks where we've seen that trend across all of the others, there being a gap between the perceptions between parents. Actually, when it comes to attending events, it's a universal challenge almost when we're looking at it, because there is a limited difference between the primary and secondary experience here within how easy or difficult they find it to attend school events, which talks largely to kind of the personal lives of parents and carers, and the challenges that they're facing with attending school events, clashing with other external life admin and care and responsibilities and work responsibilities. We can see that around 60%, so 58% of parents report finding it easy to attend school events, which suggests that the other 40% are saying that it is difficult for them to attend school events. So making that engagement with the school in those out of hours activities or events that they put on difficulty. So what we meant by school events here is things like parents' evenings or sessions that are put on for supporting parents with curriculum or the events of those sorts of nature outside of school hours. One of the questions that we ask within the parent engagement survey that we run is how clear is the role of the trust in this school? So if we look at the trend there for primary parents, we see that decrease over the last 3 years. So from 2022-23 academic year to 24-25, dipping from 51% down to 48%. And for secondary, we see for the last year, it's actually remained the same, around 40%, but dropping compared to 22-23, 42%. But with that gap narrowing between the the clarity of the role of the trust in a school. Um, Part of this might be down to the changing in approaches of trusts and allowing for more autonomy within the data. We've heard that a couple of times from discussions with when I was speaking with John before this call. He John Murphy before this call he did mention that could possibly be one of the reasons why we're seeing this within this data is that that changing and the way that trusts are running and allowing for more autonomy in schools could be one of the explaining factors for this. And he's because he's not here, I thought I would mention that just as a brief explanation of what that might look like. Um, if we're looking at how likely parents are to recommend this school to other parents on a scale of 1 to 10, we do see that the majority of parents would recommend their school to others. So 82% of primary parents would recommend their school to other parents, and 71% of secondary parents would recommend their school to others. And we see it's remained fairly consistent over time. Slight improvement for primary, and a slight negative drop for sorry, a slight improvement for secondary, but a negative drop for primary. But we can see that again, that similar trend of it narrowing the gap between the primary and secondary experience there. I did mention at the start we'd be looking at some of the open answer analysis that we had for some of our questions within our parent survey. And we're going to have a look at some of the parents' own words of the progress reporting in the meetings within school, because these were areas that are high on parents' priorities. So, open answers to the question, what did you value most in the way your current schools work with parents, meetings and events? So the events outside of ours, like we were speaking about earlier, such as like parents' evenings and workshops, those were up there with some of the areas that parents valued most in the way that schools were currently working with parents. And you can see one example there. As a mum with a child with SEND, I appreciate the availability of the year management team or the Senko for meetings when I'm concerned about the child. So being able to book in meetings out of hours regarding their child and talking about some of their concerns. And parents' engagement meetings are useful, inclusive for parents, and vital in communicating. These There were two selected out of them, but they're there to highlight the trend that we saw within that. There were many more responses that are in line with these that highlight the same narrative there with those. Same for when we're looking at the responses for progress reports and attainment data. But we saw that they really appreciate the reports home on the ongoing assessments, and it helps parents to understand their child's progress. That highlighting the fact that they enjoy the effort score is really beneficial because it's not always about the grades, but some parents really value the effort that their child's are putting in with those as well. And what we did see is when we look across to what could the school do to further the support of engagement, these two areas came up again. So what it does highlight is that one approach doesn't necessarily fit all when it comes to parents, because we can see there that some parents want more parents' evenings. They make events more accessible to parents around certain hours or the time restraints. And that some parents would like more progress reporting or on a half-termly basis rather than a full-termly basis. But obviously, some of these suggestions of wanting these areas to support engagement does have an effect on staff workload as well with those. So it's important to consider when looking at the areas that within this national data where parents are saying we'd love this additional support, we'd love these additional areas. I think it is a matter of balancing that with the staff workload in elements of these. So in summary, we have seen an improvement within the parent data when it comes to engagement and comms. Those have improved. We've also seen that the gap is kind of narrowing between primary and secondary, with the general trend of primary parents being less positive about elements within the parent experience, and secondary being more positive than last year with the parent experience. And in their own words, progress reporting and meetings with the school are a high priority, but there are areas within those two priorities that they'd love to see more of, or changes and developments within those. So that is the data that we have within the parent report. What I would love to do now is open it up to Kathy for your thoughts on kind of the data and kind of anything that stood out to you from that data that you kind of see in the day to day as well.
Yes, thanks, Ben. I think I've been working in this area of kind of parental engagement for at least 15 years. And one of the things that strikes me is what parents were talking about or wanting schools to prioritise back in 2016 are broadly the same. So what I'm really interested in today is thinking about how can we really boost this partnership. What are we really striving for when we're using the words engagement, parental involvement? What is the ultimate goal when we're talking about that relationship with parents? So that's what I've been reflecting on as you've shared some of that data. And I think it's very, very important that schools bear in mind that the goal is parental self-efficacy. We are trying to boost parental interest in their children's lives and learning, and we're trying to develop parental confidence that they can work with you in partnership to boost academic outcomes. So I think at the heart of this, even if parents feel satisfied with comms, etc., the ultimate goal is, can we drive academic outcomes? And parents are an enormous untapped pool of resource and power that we really need to ignite, I think, across our school community. So what I'm really interested in is making sure everyone comes away understanding the difference between parental involvement and parental engagement. The fact that I show up at my son's rugby match on a Saturday, it's nice to be told about the match, to go to the match. It's nice to be told about, a particular evening in school. But the real meat of this relationship is, am I being enabled, empowered to support my child's learning through that relationship with the school? So there is a difference in the research literature between engagement and involvement. And I think as schools and certainly, heads of trust thinking about what does parental engagement look like in our school, and how is that related to those academic outcomes that we all want to see, to social mobility, to all the things where are the drivers in that relationship? So I think that's a first point I want to make. The second point is the parallels between what staff need, because they're human, and what parents need, because we're all humans, is everybody needs to feel like they matter. And that is a psychological term, mattering. In fact, I would highly recommend to all of you a book by Zach Mercurio on the art of mattering that's just come out. Everybody in the school needs to feel heard, valued, and seen. And, throughout your presentation, Ben, I was thinking about relationships, trust, respect, partnership. At the heart of it, every parent, every member of staff wants to feel heard, valued, and seen. And that is the framework that I think we need to think about when we're thinking about comms, relationships, and engagement. I think that there are some easy wins for schools. And I think if you've drawn attention to a couple of things. One is progress reports and one are events. So let's have a little think about those. It is extremely frustrating for parents to potentially find out their child is not meeting expectations in February when they've been in school since September. It's very frustrating for teachers to have to write reports that some parents find very, very difficult to understand. And staff are spending a huge amount of time on those. Can we revolutionize school reports? As a parent, to use John Hattie's phrase, we don't want to read edubabble. We want parents speak. I want to know, is my child doing well in maths? Is he trying his best? If not, what can I do as a busy parent to help my child as a non-teacher, as a non-maths expert? And the real power of engaging parents is giving them a little bit of confidence to ask a question, to support their child with revision, to understand how to support children with class tests and assessments. So if you peel back the layers within this relationship, at the heart of it is, do I feel more confident to help my child? And I think there are pivotal points in this relationship, and one stage has not really been mentioned so much so far, and that is the point of transition into your school is the biggest opportunity of all to set the tone, to tell schools that you are passionate, that you're purposeful, what you're here for, to ignite teacher passion for what they're doing, who they are. Parents want to know, who is this person who's teaching my child all day long? What is this school about? And I think remembering that we're not on two sides, that we are both two sets of people who want to do everything in our power to help these children. So I think in comms and marketing, conveying, get back to the heart and soul of teaching. What are we here for? You mentioned earlier, Ben, or I think someone else did, about salaries. People are in it to help children. And I think we need to go back to that and say to parents, look, this is who we are. These are the constraints we're under, but we're here to work together, and in partnership, in alignment, we're going to make, great progress, but we need you. The children need us, but we need you. So I think parental engagement is so much more, I think, than schools kind of, reviewing and auditing some of those systems. And I think we should give our staff in schools permission to be warm, to be engaging, to be themselves, even within that sort of professional role and capacity. So those are some of my initial thoughts. The one about events that you mentioned, we have to distinguish between me going into school to see, a science lesson in action, or attending what is the impact of that? What are we trying to achieve with those events? So at the heart of this, we need to think about, what is the goal? Are we evaluating the impact around the pupil outcomes? So just visiting the school is not going to drive outcomes. It does promote a sense of belonging, which contributes to mattering, and that's fantastic. But ultimately, we need to make sure that if parents are not rocking up to workshops, we have to ditch that idea and think outside the box. If it's incredibly difficult for parents who might take an evening off work, park the car, get a babysitter, go to the physical parents' evening, only to be told Johnny's doing really well in a 5-minute chat. So these are situations where we can really frustrate that relationship when we don't need to. And I would argue, in terms of progress, bringing children, young parents into school, think carefully about why you're doing that. When are you doing that? Does every parent have to be invited to parents' evening, or could you just segment into the parents you really need to speak to and spend longer time with? So I think that we need to be honest with parents about what we're trying to achieve. I think we need to innovate. I think we need to ditch stuff that doesn't work. And I think we need to listen to school staff who, for the last 15 years, I have never met a member of staff who likes writing school reports, because a lot of them find them completely useless because there's no feedback. Some parents don't read them. And we need to think about, how can we deliver feedback to parents in a way that inspires them, motivates them to say to their child, this is what we can do together, or asking them something that can ignite a little bit more motivation. So those are my kind of broad brush responses.
Thanks so much, Kathy. Yeah, you spoke about how making parents feel like they matter was really important, and one thing that Iona's been working on a lot and discussing a lot over the last couple of webinars and discussions that she's been having with sector leaders is around listening organisations and how we make people within our school communities feel that they matter. And one of the questions that we saw within the data for this one was, how often do you see that your feedback to the school has impact. So how engaged are we making parents feel, and how much do they feel that they matter and their opinion matters within those school environments? So I don't know if Iona, you want to come in on that and talk a little bit about kind of the work you've been leading on that.
Thank you. Yeah, I as you were presenting the data, and then Kathy, as you were speaking, I wrote down two words that I wanted to pick up. One was partnering, and I'll come back to that, and the other one was mattering. And I think that's exactly what this is about. And I think on this slide, there's three things here which I think are really noteworthy. No offense to being informed about punctuality, but I'm going to skip over that one and look at the other three measures here: how satisfied parents are with the school's efforts to engage them, how often they see the feedback has impact, and how respected they feel. Those are, I think, quite interrelated. And what on the how often you feel that your feedback has impact, what I think is really, really noteworthy about this question in the parent data set, and bear in mind, Edurio is a paid for service, so all of the schools and trusts that take part in an Edurio survey have paid an external provider to ask this question of their parents. A quarter of all of responses to this question is not applicable. So a quarter of the parents that have been asked by a school or trust that has paid someone else to ask them whether or not they feel their feedback has impact say that they feel that it rarely never or only sometimes has an impact. And I think that is really, really important for us to think about. As Ben said, we've been thinking about what it means to kind of lead through listening, and the kind of general notion there is that I think this is very, very related to the notion of mattering that Kathy brought up. If you feel that your voice has been heard, if you feel that your opinion matters, if you feel respected, that has a huge impact on engagement. There are plenty of studies. I could list many of them, but there are plenty of studies. It's a well-known fact that if you feel heard, if you feel listened to, then you are more likely to feel engaged and feel that you matter. And I think that what's really, really important when we think about this in terms of parents, but also in terms of pupils and staff and the kind of whole school community, is that it's also a good idea for the organisation to be listening. If you better understand the needs of your people, you can make easier decisions. Maybe you were thinking that this is the most important thing for you to focus on. You're about to sort of set up this big task force, pour all this resource in. If no one's actually finding it an issue, then maybe you're solving for a problem that doesn't need solving, and there might be something else over here that really does need that attention. And I think on top of that, once people are brought into the discussion, even if they're not getting exactly what they want, and Ben just presented data from the open text questions that shows conflicting information. Parents are really, really happy with the events, and they want the events to improve. They're really happy with the actually those two things could be true. But yeah, there are tensions within your community, and understanding that in much more detail. And Rowena made the point around events, and if we've got a staff workload issue, can we shift to later parents' evenings without causing that challenge? So properly understanding what the needs of your people really are, not necessarily then meeting all of those needs, because they might be wants rather than needs. They might be kind of there might be a good reason why we can't meet that, but actually once we kind of have a clear understanding of this is what people are after, this is what would make the most sense, we're going to make this decision, and this is why we're making that decision, change becomes easier because it becomes done with, not done to. And people even if they don't get what they want, if they feel that they've been included in the discussion, then it makes it that much easier to sort of get on board. So I think there's a really important piece there around the importance of listening when it comes to mattering, but there's also, I think, a strategic benefit to organisations for doing
Totally.
so.
And also, if I could just add, I was in my local supermarket the other day. They had a notice board, a global organisation. It had a basic notice board saying, you said, we did. You asked, we're thinking about. And it's just a notice board, but it shows that, parents like to be asked, I would say, as a very basic point, because it does make them feel valued, as you've just pointed out. But also, I think as schools, we want to be ahead of the game. We want to preempt those complaints that we were hearing about earlier on. And one of the ways to preempt parental complaints is to make sure we're having a little bit more regular drop in. It could be online, grumbles, dealing with grumbles a little bit earlier. If you're having 20 emails about the same topic, it's time for a webinar. So mopping up those problems and complaints thematically earlier, I think, is very useful. And I'm sure we would all agree it's always good. A sign of effective leadership is turning over stones, not being afraid to say, how are we doing? What does it feel like for you? And making sure that we're kind of rigorously showing that we care, because often that is sufficient. That we show we care, we ask questions, and we're showing that we're making an effort to even consider or be honest about why we can't make some of those changes as well. I think that's deeply appreciated by parents.
Yeah, and one thing I said, I picked up the kind of mattering and the partnering thing from what you said, and I think on the partnering side of things, one thing I just shared a link in the chat, and I can share it again. So it's in, I think I put it in a thread, so I can put it in the main bit. But we partnered last in the autumn term with Sparrowhawk Communications, which is a PR organization focused on the school sector. And we did a piece on parental engagement and parental communication and how to get comms right. And there's some really, really cool stuff that came out of that. And I've got a couple of examples here. One of the kind of themes was always reminding each other, that's staff reminding yourselves, reminding the parents throughout, making sure that it's well understood that we have a shared purpose, and that shared purpose is the child. And there's a couple of examples that I can pull out. But yeah, I think the link's now in the chat for anyone who's looking for more detail. Nova Education Trust in the Midlands, whenever they have a kind of more difficult a sort of a challenge has been raised, or there's an issue that needs tackling, they start by saying, we know that this is about what's best for the child, and this is about us working together to find that solution. And that sort of starts to kind of de-escalate the issue straight away, if you know that actually we're doing this we have a shared objective here. And Ted Rag Trust, they have at one of their schools, they have a policy where, and we've spoken about transition year at some point this afternoon. They make sure that within the first week of every child arriving in year 7, the parents get a phone call home that includes some kind of positive feedback about their child.
Yeah.
And it's simple. I mean, to Rowena's point around staff workload, it's not simple from that perspective. But what that does is make sure that the first interaction that parents are having with the school is a positive one. And I think I was thinking the other day about kind of when you have an annoying customer service issue, and then you speak to a customer service representative and they shut you down, and then immediately whatever the issue was gets 10 times worse because you don't feel listened to, and you feel annoyed about that interaction. Or you speak to someone and they hear you, and you feel that there's a sense of goodwill from the beginning. Whatever the problem is can either get 10 times worse or 10 times better based on that kind of initial interaction. And I think the idea that the team at Ted Rag had, I think is really, really lovely.
Yeah. Positive phone calls home are a complete game changer. So this is some of the softer stuff that's transformative. I was in a school recently, a very disadvantaged school in Northern Ireland, and one of the members of staff on rotation every week, somebody spends 30 minutes in an office ringing a list of parents with positive comments and compliments to children who perhaps don't receive as much praise or compliment or feedback. And it is completely transformative, not just for parental confidence, but it impacts how the parent is interacting with that young person. And it is a very, very good use of time because you can really melt some of that disengagement or demoralization. Having a voicemail from a school saying how amazed they were by Johnny's or progress in school, or how much he concentrated today. It could be anything. It totally is a mood enhancer. It really boosts parental confidence, and it's a very exciting and very human way that spreads through the school, that lovely sense that they do care. And it makes some of those more complex conversations later, maybe about behavior or something else, a little easier, because the trust is then built in. It's cultivated through those very informal rapport, dynamics and things that schools can do, in a way that is time efficient. It is effective.
Yeah, and I think one thing, there's a kind of another theme in the guide that is about that sort of collaborating and bringing the parents properly into the conversation and making it more of a partnership than a sort of one-way flow of communication or whatever. And there's a couple of examples that I thought are really, really lovely from that. So one of the schools, they got feedback in the Edurio survey that their comms weren't particularly clear. And the school said, okay, well, we want to improve that. And what they did was they formed a working group with parents to write those communications guidelines together. And they said, okay, well, what are the rules of communication? What do we need? When should we be sending out what information, via what channels, and so on. And they brought parents into that and said, okay, let's make this solution together. And there's I think it's even cooler, but my opinion doesn't matter. There's another example which I think is really, really cool. Big Education Trust in the southeast of London. They were I'm not sure if anyone's on the line from Big Education, but shout out if you are. They called on their school community to really, really get stuck in. So when they were forming one of their new schools, they had to do a lot of bid writing, and they had to do there were various jobs that needed doing that they just put out to their community who is experienced in this area. And there was somebody, as I said, who was an experienced bid writer who joined and gave their time as a teacher to support with that. There's somebody else who had never, I don't think she'd ever worked as a chef, but she was a really passionate baker and used to bring lots of food to the kind of events. And she ended up being brought in and getting a job within the school, within their family zone, and working on building on her kind of chef skills and becoming kind of part of the community, gainful employment through it, and so on. And it was I think it's a few examples of where you see, like you said, everyone here is a human, and working together and find creative ways to problem solve, I think is really, really nice.
Yeah, and I think just returning to that fundamental point about mattering, I have mentioned things about learning and academic outcomes and parental engagement in that regard, but it is crucial that, at the end of the day, a school is a community. And how do we cultivate community? We learn about each other. We dissolve, difference. We celebrate diversity. We understand, we're proud of all of the members of our school community. We learn about them. We show an interest in them. We're curious about one another. So all of those events around finding out who we are, celebrating different family forms in your school, people from different countries speaking different languages, all of that. Who are we? How do we come together? But what are our shared values? When we're coming together as a school community. And I think so. There are some events that are fundamental, particularly at the beginning of years or the ends of years, where there's an opportunity to keep our eye on the prize, which is that everyone feels, proud that they're part of that school. And that's, a very important protective asset for pupil mental health. It's a great retention point, as well for teachers. So, I think keeping our eye on identity and belonging, those are the right words that we should be thinking about, when we're thinking about, mattering in general. Belonging is good, but it's not enough. They do feel to feel like they matter as well.
Yeah, I think we may have some people on the call today. We've heard some brilliant examples of what we could do around some of these challenges that we face. So some of the things Iona's been talking about that we've implemented with some examples there. Kathy, I know tooled up are a really useful tool for schools and trusts with regards to parent comms and for parental engagement within schools. I think it would be really useful if you could share an insight into if you were a new head teacher within a school. What would you do immediately to kind of like work on some of these challenges? If you was in a school or a trust that had challenges with parental engagement, and just share some of kind of like your experience with this with possible new heads within the call
Yeah.
with us today.
I think if I was going to be a new head teacher in a school, I would really offer many opportunities for parents to talk to me, ask me questions, introduce myself, talk about who I am as a person, as an educator, what I'm about. If I don't do that, they'll be chatting about me on WhatsApp parent groups. We have to really, I think, be transparent and honest about who we are, what we're about, what we believe in. And I think working on that early rapport and being proud of who you are means that parents will go, yeah, I had a great, this person is credible. This is someone I believe in. When they send out things, I'm going to trust that that's the right thing they're going to do. So it is about early engagement, but engaging and being accessible in different ways. It might be a coffee morning, it might be a formal presentation, it might be come and ask me anything on a webinar, that kind of confidence that you're open to anything, any question. And it might be during those conversations, they find out that you support a certain football team, or you have a Labrador at home. All that soft stuff is what parents really, really like. They want to know you too. You might have kids, and it might feel, you're a parent. Parents really resonate with that kind of honesty and transparency. Being honest about things that in the school you want to change, that you don't like. People love that, because that, again, they won't be complaining on WhatsApp because you've been honest about stuff that doesn't work. And in fact, one of the most powerful things I've ever read was an article in a magazine from a head teacher talking about all the things that he did during the year that didn't work, that he was going to change next year. And I thought, that is a person I would trust, right? So I think that that's the approach I would have. And I think is a very powerful one. And listening, having lots of chats, speaking to different groups of parents, what's your experience? What's worked well? What do you think we should be proud of? So there's a lot of groundwork in that question, and having kind of more regular check-ins rather than sort of big serious events, and being very careful about when we do invite parents in, and being absolutely totally laser focused on getting transition right, and learning about families. If you learn, for example, that a parent is anxious about certain things, there will be certain support mechanisms you can put in place. If you learn that children have particular needs at that particular point, again, so it's an opportunity at the point of transition to open up dialogues, get good data, baseline data, and articulate your goals and values and vision for you and your role, I think.
Yeah, your answer there really like owes to the initial point you made of helping to make parents feel like they matter, like bringing them in on those soft skills and bringing them in to really learn who you are. You're also, by doing that, getting to know who they are, the sorts of questions that they want to know, and really making them feel like in those early stages of that engagement with them that they matter as well as part of this new stage of the school with this new leadership and this new direction that maybe you may be going in. Iona, is there anything else you may add to that?
Yeah, it's funny. So I am neither a educator nor a parent. That might make me the least qualified person of the 50 people on this call to talk about what I would do in my first days as a head. But what I'm going to do is again go back to what we've heard from others, and I do think that first impression and sort of getting a sort of bit of goodwill in the relationship as early as possible does seem to be a theme that sort of runs through where we see this working within schools and trusts across the country. And I think as well, working out what exact role you want to play. So I've already shared the comms guide, but we also have a guide called Thriving Trust Communities, which is about the role that trusts play within their communities. And I think that's really, really an interesting topic. And I know we're about to run out of time and I'm about to start a whole big new direction. But I do think that, yeah, understanding, are you a what role are you as an individual playing in this, and where do you want people to think of you when they need someone to talk to versus a different person or a different part of the structure. So kind of, yeah, those two, I think, strong start and building that sort of initial impression, but also having clarity about what where parents can go when they have a particular need.
Yeah. I also think, humility and leadership is so powerful. Being able to just say, I'd like some ideas from you, asking the parent community in your head teacher blog. Does anybody have had good recommendations for what, have you read a good book recently? Like literally,
Mm.
humility is so engaging for parents, and it doesn't compromise your professionalism. In fact, I think it speaks of confidence just to listen and to show that you are in addition to being a listening organization, you like to learn. You're a learning organization. You have a growth mindset as an organization, and that is deeply refreshing. And I think there's great merit in that approach in general.
Yeah, I think I'm really conscious that we're running close to the end of this session, and we could keep talking about many aspects of this for the next hours. Like Iona said, there's plenty more to touch on when it comes to what we can do to support parent engagement. Does anybody who's on the call with us have any questions for Dr. Kathy Weston or Iona in the call that we could kind of answer in the last couple of minutes before we go on a quick break before the pupil session? Feel free to come off mute and ask the questions, or pop them in the chat, and we can just discuss those quickly. Doesn't look like we've got many. Just checking the chat, see if there's anything from earlier that we haven't covered from during this session.
Ben, it's Rowena here. Could I ask a question, please?
Of course you can.
Hi, everybody. Rowena Hackwood from Australia Academy Trust. We don't, so it's been a really interesting session. Thank you very much. I think the thing which is most challenging for trusts of the type of Australia is about we've got to be a little bit careful not to come from an assumption that parents want to be engaged with. And in certain communities, we're serving really significantly educationally disengaged parts of the population for whom it's not just about anxiety about going into school, it's about really quite fundamental antipathy towards education. And I just wondered if the panel had any views or ideas in that regard about parents who really don't want to be engaged with. So I think there's a little bit of a risk in this narrative that we assume that everybody does want to be engaged with. It's just that the schools are getting it wrong. And I don't think from our experience that's universally the case, although taking Dr. Weston's advice about humility, I am going to say that we do sometimes get it wrong. So it's a little bit of both. So I just wondered if the panel had any thoughts on that.
I think in that, first of all, I would draw attention to the work of Professor Janet Goodall, who, my colleague, who I've written some books with, but Janet Goodall specializes in engagement with more disadvantaged communities or communities, that might struggle to engage in education. So Janet's written some good stuff. Secondly, I would think about community leaders within that cohort of parents. There's a layer between the families and the school that might be able to be much more influential, and to try and simply ease coming into the school physically. And it might be something that does require the support and scaffolding of a community member, there's a kind of an interim there, or a mediation between communities, and visiting certain communities at home. So doing outreach work, learning, listening. And again, depending on what sort of, what communities we're thinking about, I think finding role models strategically, maybe ex-pupils who can deliver a talk to that community, even if it's online, or in a community centre, not the school. So can we innovate using some of those inspirational people that can really understand some of those cultural barriers in depth, and have lived experience of enjoying being at your school and navigating some of those challenges. So I think that that's probably what I would do as a first attempt.
One thing in our Thriving Trust Communities Guide, there's a section from Rose Learning Trust, and they speak about the fact that for some families within their trust schools, this is their first experience of the UK system. So in areas where there are high mobility, or there might be language barriers, it could be that certain parents have never actually interacted with a school in the UK, and I think there is a huge kind of challenge, and also an opportunity there. And I think they talk about kind of working with local authorities and creating community hubs. All of this, doing this straight after a session on staff workload and all of that. These aren't simple solutions, but I think I believe the Thriving Schools, the Thriving Trusts guide is linked here. But in there, if you check out the Rose Learning Trust work, I think there's some really good stuff there.
I just want to say a massive thanks to Iona and Dr. Kathy Weston for joining the panel for this session. I hope it's been really useful for you on the call to hear about some of these reflections on our parent experience data. I think the link is also in the chat if you're interested in reading or finding more out about that data that's in there. But I'd also recommend taking a look at the Talk website and having a look at some of the work that they're doing, and some of the resources that they definitely have to support you with your endeavours in this area of work.